There are battles fought for strategic ground. There are battles fought for decisive victory. And then, there is Verdun. For 10 months in 1916, it became the crucible of the First World War. Not a battle of maneuver, but of attrition. A place where human life was measured in inches of mud, and courage was simply the will to endure. Today, we delve into the hell on earth where nations sought to bleed each other dry. This is the Battle of Verdun. In the bitter winter of 1916, the Great War had already consumed more than a year and a half. From the Swiss border to the North Sea, two vast armies faced each other across a landscape of trenches, barbed wire, and shell craters. Millions of men huddled in the mud, enduring the cold, the rats, the lice, and the constant threat of sudden, violent death. The war had become a stalemate. Neither side could break through. Neither side could achieve the decisive victory that would end the conflict. And so the killing continued, month after month, with no end in sight. But in the German High Command, one man believed he had found a solution, a way to break the deadlock not through breakthrough, but through systematic destruction. His name was General Erich von Falkenhayn, Chief of the German General Staff. And his plan for 1916 would create one of the longest, bloodiest, and most futile battles in human history. Falkenhayn understood that neither Germany nor the Allies had the capacity to achieve a breakthrough on the Western Front. The defensive power of modern weapons, machine guns, artillery, barbed wire, was simply too great. Any attacking force would be slaughtered before it could penetrate the enemy's defensive depth. But Falkenhayn believed there was another way to win. If Germany could not break through the French lines, it could destroy the French army through attrition. Not by capturing territory, but by forcing France to commit its reserves to a battle in a place they could not afford to lose, and then methodically annihilating those reserves with artillery fire. In a memorandum to the Kaiser, Falkenhayn outlined his strategy with cold precision. He wrote of finding a target so important, so symbolic, so deeply embedded in French national consciousness that France would throw every available man into its defense. And once those men were committed, German artillery would simply grind them to pieces. The objective, in Falkenhayn's own words, was to bleed the French army white. The target he selected was the fortress city of Verdun. Verdun sat on the River Meuse in northeastern France, a bulge in the French line that jutted toward German positions. It was an ancient city, with roots stretching back to Roman times. More importantly, it had enormous symbolic significance for France. In 843 AD, the Treaty of Verdun had divided Charlemagne's empire, establishing the foundation for the French nation. In the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, Verdun had been the last fortress to surrender to the Germans, holding out long after the main French armies had been defeated. For France, Verdun represented history, honor, and national identity. It could not be allowed to fall. Surrounding the city was a ring of massive fortifications, 20 major forts and 40 smaller fortified positions, all connected by underground tunnels, trenches, and communication lines. These forts, built in the decades after the Franco-Prussian War, were intended to make Verdun impregnable. They had thick concrete walls, underground barracks and magazines, artillery positions with interlocking fields of fire. The two most powerful were Fort Douaumont on the northeast side and Fort Vaux to the east. But by early 1916, the French High Command had made a catastrophic error. Observing the fall of Belgian forts to German heavy artillery in 1914, French commanders concluded that fixed fortifications were obsolete, vulnerable to modern siege guns. They ordered the Verdun forts to be stripped of most of their artillery and garrison troops. The guns were moved to other sectors. The concrete fortifications were left with skeleton crews, sometimes just a few dozen men to guard positions designed to hold hundreds. Verdun, the symbol of French strength, had been hollowed out from within. Falkenhayn knew this. German intelligence had tracked the removal of French guns. The target was vulnerable. The stage was set. German preparations for the offensive were massive and methodical. Over 1,200 artillery pieces were moved into position on the heights north and east of Verdun, including heavy siege guns, howitzers, and mortars. Ammunition dumps were established, stockpiled with over 2.5 million shells. Infantry divisions were brought up and placed in jumping-off positions. Roads were improved to handle the traffic. Command posts were established. Every detail was planned with Prussian efficiency. The Germans christened the Operation Gericht, Judgment. The attack was originally scheduled for February 12th, but poor weather delayed it. For 9 days, German soldiers waited in their trenches as snow fell and fog obscured the battlefield. The French, aware that something was being prepared but uncertain of its scale or exact location, brought up some reinforcements but remained largely unprepared for what was coming. Then, at 7:12 a.m. on February 21, 1916, the sky above Verdun exploded. The German artillery bombardment that morning was unprecedented in its intensity and concentration. Over 1,000 guns firing simultaneously, targeting an 8-mile front. Heavy shells weighing hundreds of pounds crashed into French positions, throwing up geysers of earth and steel. Lighter guns poured high explosive and shrapnel rounds into trench systems, communication lines, and support areas. The sound was indescribable, a continuous, rolling thunder that could be heard over 100 miles away. The ground shook continuously. Trees were uprooted. Entire trenches disappeared, buried under tons of earth. Buildings in Verdun itself, miles from the front line, had their windows shattered by the concussion. And it did not stop. Hour after hour, the shells fell. The bombardment continued through the morning, into the afternoon, into the evening. 9 hours of continuous, concentrated artillery fire, the most intense bombardment the world had yet seen. French soldiers in the forward trenches could do nothing but huddle in their dugouts and pray. Communication lines were cut almost immediately. Officers lost contact with their units. Orders could not be transmitted. The wounded could not be evacuated. Some positions simply ceased to exist, their entire garrisons buried alive or blown to pieces. When the German infantry finally advanced on the afternoon of February 21st, they found French positions shattered. Dazed survivors emerged from dugouts to surrender. Others, shell-shocked and deafened, wandered aimlessly through the cratered landscape. Entire sections of the French line had been obliterated. The Germans pushed forward rapidly against minimal resistance, advancing several miles in just a few days, extraordinary progress by Western Front standards. And on February 25th, a German patrol entered Fort Douaumont and found it defended by fewer than 60 men, mostly elderly reservists and wounded soldiers recovering in the fort's infirmary. Fort Douaumont, the strongest fortress in the Verdun system, the symbol of French defensive power, fell without a fight. A handful of German soldiers simply walked in and accepted the garrison's surrender. The news sent shockwaves through France. Verdun was in mortal danger. And if Verdun fell, the consequences, strategic, psychological, political, would be catastrophic. By the end of February 1916, the French position at Verdun was approaching collapse. German forces had advanced rapidly, capturing key positions and threatening to break through to the city itself. French defenders, stunned by the unprecedented artillery bombardment and disorganized by the speed of the German assault, were falling back in disorder. The French High Command faced a terrible choice. They could abandon Verdun, withdraw to more defensible positions, and shorten their lines. Or they could commit to holding the city at all costs, pouring in reinforcements to stop the German advance, which was precisely what Falkenhayn wanted them to do. There was never any real doubt about the decision. Verdun could not be abandoned. Its symbolic importance was too great. The political consequences of its fall were unthinkable. France would stand and fight, whatever the cost. But first, they needed a commander who could stabilize the situation, restore order to the defense, and organize a resistance that could endure what everyone now understood would be a battle of unprecedented length and brutality. The man chosen for this task was General Philippe Pétain. Pétain was 59 years old, a career officer who had spent decades in the French army without achieving high command until the war began. He was known for his caution, his concern for the welfare of his soldiers, and his understanding that modern warfare had fundamentally changed. Unlike many French generals who still believed in the doctrine of offensive à outrance, attack at all costs, Pétain understood the power of defensive firepower and the necessity of using artillery to support infantry rather than relying on bayonet charges. On the night of February 25th, Pétain was summoned from his headquarters and given command of the defense of Verdun. He arrived at his new command post in the middle of a snowstorm, immediately began reviewing the situation, and within hours issued the order that would define the battle and become immortal in French history. Ils ne passeront pas. They shall not pass. Pétain's first challenge was purely logistical. Verdun was nearly surrounded on three sides by German positions. The rail lines that normally supplied the city had been cut or were under German artillery fire. There was only one route left, a minor country road running southwest from Verdun to the town of Bar-le-Duc, about 50 miles away. This road, little more than a narrow track when the battle began, would have to supply an entire army, hundreds of thousands of men, along with their ammunition, food, water, medical supplies, and all the other necessities of modern warfare. And it would have to carry all of this traffic while simultaneously evacuating the wounded and bringing in fresh troops. The road became known as La Voie Sacrée, the Sacred Way. What happened on the Sacred Way in the months that followed was one of the greatest logistical achievements in military history. The road was widened, reinforced with crushed stone, and divided into lanes for traffic moving in each direction. Territorial troops, older men no longer fit for frontline service, were stationed every 25 yards along the entire 50-mile length of the road. Their job was continuous maintenance, filling shell craters from German artillery fire, repairing damage, keeping the road passable at all costs. And on that road, day and night, month after month, rolled an endless convoy of trucks. 3,900 trucks. That was the number in constant rotation. They moved in convoy, headlights blazing at night despite the risk of German artillery, maintaining a steady pace, separated by precise intervals. Every 24 hours, approximately 6,000 trucks passed along the Sacred Way, carrying 4,000 tons of supplies into Verdun and bringing out the wounded and exhausted troops being rotated to the rear. A truck passed any given point on the Sacred Way every 14 seconds. Think about that. Every 14 seconds, another truck. Hour after hour. Day after day. For 10 months. The drivers were exhausted, driving through mud, snow, darkness, and constant threat of German bombardment. Many were killed when shells struck their vehicles. Others died in accidents on the treacherous road. But the convoy never stopped. It could not stop. If the Sacred Way closed, Verdun would fall. The road became sacred not through religious ceremony, but through sacrifice. The sacrifice of the territorial soldiers who maintained it, the drivers who navigated it, and the hundreds of thousands of soldiers who traveled it toward the front line, knowing that they might never travel back. Pétain's second major innovation was his system for rotating troops through the front line, a system that came to be known as the Noria, named after a water wheel that continuously brings up buckets from a well. In previous battles, divisions would be committed to the front and remain there until they were destroyed or the battle ended, being ground down to nothing through continuous combat. Pétain recognized that this approach would not work at Verdun, where the artillery bombardment was too intense, too continuous, for any unit to endure for more than a few days. Instead, he established a rotation system. Divisions would be sent to the front line for a short period, typically a week to 10 days, then pulled back to rest and refit, replaced by fresh divisions from reserve. This meant that more divisions had to be committed to the battle overall. But it also meant that no single division would be completely destroyed in a single tour at the front. The consequence of this system was staggering. By the time the battle ended, 70% of the entire French army, nearly every division France possessed, had served at Verdun at least once. Many served multiple times, rotating through the hell of the front line again and again. This meant that Verdun was not just a battle fought by some distant professional army. It was a battle fought by the entire nation. Nearly every French soldier who survived the war had been to Verdun. Nearly every French family had a son, husband, father, or brother who had endured its horrors. Verdun became the defining experience of the French army in the Great War. It created a shared trauma, a collective memory that would shape French society for generations. When French veterans spoke of the front, they almost always meant Verdun. When they spoke of what war really meant, they described what they had witnessed on those shell-torn slopes along the Meuse. But in those first weeks of the battle, all of this lay in the future. In late February and early March, the immediate question was simply whether the French line would hold. German attacks continued with relentless pressure. Each day brought fresh artillery bombardments, followed by infantry assaults that crashed against French positions, were repulsed, and then came again the next day and the day after that. The fighting was close quarters, brutal, often hand-to-hand. Villages changed hands multiple times. Individual hills and woods became battlegrounds where thousands died for yards of ground. The names of these places, Mort Homme, Dead Man, Côte 304, Bois de Cours, became synonymous with slaughter. And through it all, the artillery continued. The Germans fired. The French replied. Shells fell on positions, on supply routes, on road junctions, on any place where troops might gather. The landscape was being systematically destroyed, transformed into a moonscape of craters and shattered tree stumps. But the line held. Pétain's system worked. French soldiers, knowing they would be rotated out after a few days, found the strength to endure. The sacred way continued to function, supplies continued to flow, and reinforcements arrived to replace the casualties. Slowly, the initial German momentum stalled. By early March, the rapid German advance had stopped. The battle was settling into a pattern: attack, counterattack, bombardment, defense. The same pattern that had characterized every other battle on the Western Front. But here at Verdun, it would continue not for weeks but for 10 months. Falkenhayn's plan was working, but not quite as he had intended. Yes, the French were committing enormous resources to Verdun's defense. Yes, casualties were mounting rapidly. But German casualties were mounting too. The artillery that was supposed to destroy the French from a distance required infantry to hold the ground that had been bombarded, and that infantry was dying just as surely as the French defenders. The machine that was designed to bleed France white was consuming its operators as well. As the battleground into the spring and summer of 1916, the focus of the German offensive shifted. The rapid advances of February had failed to break through to Verdun. The French line had stabilized. Now the battle became a contest for individual fortifications and strong points, each one the target of concentrated German artillery and assault, each one defended by French troops who understood that every position held meant more German casualties, more time for France to endure. And nowhere was this brutal arithmetic of attrition more evident than in the battle for Fort Vaux. Fort Vaux was smaller than Douaumont, but still formidable, a massive concrete structure built into a hillside, surrounded by deep trenches and wire entanglements, bristling with machine gun positions and observation posts. After the easy capture of Fort Douaumont in February had shocked the French High Command, Vaux had been reinforced with a garrison of over 600 men under the command of Major Sylvain Eugene Raynal. The Germans began their assault on Fort Vaux in early June. First came the artillery, days of continuous bombardment that pulverized the fort's exterior, destroyed its observation cupolas, and collapsed sections of trench. The noise inside the fort was indescribable. Concrete walls several feet thick trembled under the impact of heavy shells. Dust and smoke filled the corridors. Men went deaf from the concussion. Then, on June 2nd, came the infantry. German assault troops, specially trained for fortress warfare, advanced through the smoke and dust of the bombardment. They carried grenades, flamethrowers, and explosive charges. Their objective was to fight their way into the fort itself, to penetrate the outer defenses and engage the garrison in the underground corridors and chambers. The fighting that followed was unlike anything else on the Western Front. This was not combat across no man's land, not attacks on trench systems. This was warfare in darkness, in confined spaces, in smoke-filled tunnels where men fought with pistols, knives, and grenades at point-blank range. The Germans managed to occupy the top of the fort and portions of the outer defenses. But Major Raynal and his garrison held the interior, the deep underground chambers and corridors where the real strength of the fort lay. For the next 6 days, Germans and French fought each other through the subterranean maze, separated sometimes by only a few feet of concrete and steel doors. The conditions inside Fort Vaux defied description. The ventilation system had been destroyed, so the air grew foul with the stench of unwashed bodies, excrement, and rotting wounds. Smoke from grenades and flamethrowers filled the corridors, making it nearly impossible to breathe. The wounded could not be evacuated. They lay in the darkness, crying out for water that did not exist. Water. That became the garrison's greatest torment. The fort cisterns had been damaged by shellfire. What little water remained quickly ran out. Men went days without a drop. They licked moisture from the walls. They drank their own urine. Some went mad from thirst and had to be restrained. The wounded suffered most terribly, begging for water that their comrades could not provide. Major Raynal sent carrier pigeons to French headquarters, desperately requesting relief, ammunition, and above all, water. One by one, the pigeons were released, flying through German fire. Most were shot down or lost. But one pigeon, later named Valiant, made it through, delivering Raynal's final message. The bird arrived at its destination and collapsed, dead from exhaustion and wounds. No relief came. The French launched counterattacks to reach Fort Vaux, but they were repulsed with heavy casualties. The garrison was on its own. By June 7th, after 6 days of subterranean combat, the situation inside Fort Vaux had become impossible to sustain. The garrison had no water, limited ammunition, and no hope of relief. The Germans controlled most of the fort above ground and were gradually forcing their way deeper into the interior. Men were collapsing from dehydration. The wounded were dying for lack of medical care. Major Raynal made the decision. On the morning of June 7th, he sent an officer under a flag of truce to the Germans, offering to surrender the fort. The German commander, recognizing the extraordinary courage and endurance of the French garrison, offered honorable terms. The defenders would be allowed to march out with their weapons, as a salute to their valor. At noon on June 7th, the gates of Fort Vaux opened, and Major Raynal led his surviving men into captivity. They were gaunt, filthy, many barely able to walk. But they had held for 6 days against overwhelming odds, inflicting heavy casualties on the Germans and buying precious time for the French defense. The German Crown Prince, who commanded the army group attacking Verdun, later awarded Major Raynal the honor of keeping his sword in captivity, a rare gesture of respect for a defeated enemy. But even as Fort Vaux fell, the larger strategic situation was beginning to shift. On July 1, 1916, the British and French launched a massive new offensive on the Somme, about 100 miles to the northwest. The Battle of the Somme, intended to relieve pressure on Verdun by forcing the Germans to commit reserves elsewhere, achieved that objective, though at a catastrophic cost. German forces that had been earmarked for Verdun were diverted to the Somme. Artillery batteries were pulled out of line and sent north. The intensity of German attacks at Verdun began to diminish, not because the Germans had abandoned their objectives, but because they no longer had the resources to maintain the same level of pressure on two major fronts simultaneously. For the French defenders at Verdun, the relief was real but limited. The German attacks became less frequent, but they did not stop. The artillery bombardment continued, day after day after day, and the casualties continued to mount. The battle was also becoming a testing ground for new and terrible weapons. Flamethrowers, which the Germans called Flammenwerfer, were used extensively for the first time. These weapons projected streams of burning liquid that could reach into dugouts and bunkers, incinerating defenders or forcing them into the open where they could be shot down. The psychological impact of flamethrowers was enormous. Soldiers faced with this weapon often broke and ran rather than face being burned alive. The Germans formed specialized Sturmtruppen, storm troop units, that combined flamethrowers with grenades and automatic weapons for assaulting fortified positions. Chemical weapons, too, were used at Verdun on a scale not seen before. Poison gas, chlorine, phosgene, and the new mustard gas, drifted across the battlefield, forced soldiers to fight wearing suffocating gas masks, and added another layer of horror to an already nightmarish landscape. By late summer 1916, it had become clear to both sides that the battle was achieving nothing. The Germans had not broken through to Verdun. The French had not driven the Germans back to their starting positions. The front line had moved a few miles in one direction or another, but nothing strategically significant had changed. What had changed was the casualty lists. By August, French casualties at Verdun had exceeded 200,000. German casualties were similar, perhaps 180,000. And still the battle continued. Neither side seemed able to stop the machine they had set in motion. On August 29, 1916, Falkenhayn was dismissed as chief of the German General Staff. His strategy of attrition had failed. It had not bled France white. It had bled Germany just as badly. The Kaiser, losing faith in Falkenhayn's leadership, replaced him with the legendary team of Hindenburg and Ludendorff, the heroes of Tannenberg, brought west to salvage Germany's increasingly desperate situation. Hindenburg and Ludendorff looked at Verdun and saw a battle that could not be won and should not be continued. They began planning to shift German strategy, to move toward a more defensive posture on the Western Front while seeking victory elsewhere. But they could not simply abandon Verdun without appearing weak. The battle would have to continue, at least for a while longer. On the French side, too, leadership was changing. Pétain, who had saved Verdun in February and established the defensive system that had held for months, was promoted to command of an army group. His replacement at Verdun was General Robert Nivelle, a more aggressive, more confident commander who believed that France could not only hold Verdun but retake all the ground lost since February. Nivelle began planning a major counteroffensive for the autumn, a series of massive attacks that would recapture the lost forts, restore French prestige, and prove that France could still deliver decisive blows against the German army. The battle that had begun in February with German aggression would end in December with French aggression. But the character of the fighting, the artillery bombardments, the high casualties, the minimal territorial gains, would remain unchanged. Verdun had its own logic, its own terrible momentum, and it would play itself out to the bitter end. In October 1916, as the Battle of the Somme ground toward its own bloody conclusion and the first snows began to fall on the Western Front, General Robert Nivelle launched the Great French counteroffensive at Verdun. Nivelle's plan was ambitious. He would use the same tactics that had characterized every attack on the Western Front: massive artillery preparation followed by infantry assault, but he promised to execute them more effectively, more efficiently, with better coordination between guns and infantry. He spoke confidently of violence, brutality, and rapidity as the keys to success. On October 24th, French artillery opened a devastating bombardment on German positions around Fort Douaumont. For 3 days, hundreds of French guns pounded the fort and its surroundings. Then, on October 24th, French infantry, including elite colonial and Moroccan troops, attacked through the smoke and dust. The assault, benefiting from careful planning and the element of surprise, achieved significant success. French troops fought their way through German defenses and, by the afternoon, reached Fort Douaumont itself. The Germans, weakened by months of attrition and stunned by the intensity of the French bombardment, could not hold. By nightfall, the fort that had been lost in February without a fight, the fort that had become a symbol of French humiliation, was back in French hands. The recapture of Douaumont was a tremendous psychological victory for France. Church bells rang in Paris. Newspapers proclaimed a great triumph. Nivelle became a national hero. For a nation exhausted by nearly 2.5 years of war, the return of Douaumont offered hope that victory was still possible. A second major attack followed on November 2nd, targeting the Germans' remaining positions on the east bank of the Meuse. Once again, French troops attacked after intense artillery preparation. Once again, they achieved their objectives, capturing villages and strong points that the Germans had held since the spring. And on December 18, 1916, French forces recaptured Fort Vaux, the fort where Major Raynal and his garrison had endured 6 days of hell in June. This time, the Germans offered little resistance. The fort was evacuated before French troops arrived. After 10 months of fighting, the Germans were abandoning positions they had paid for with tens of thousands of casualties. On December 18, 1916, the Battle of Verdun officially ended. 303 days after it began. Nearly 10 full months of continuous combat. The longest battle in human history up to that point. And what had it achieved? The front line at the end of the battle was, in most places, only a few miles from where it had been at the beginning. Some of the ground the Germans had captured in February had been retaken by the French in October and November. But vast sections remained in German hands. The strategically important heights north and east of Verdun were still controlled by German artillery that could shell the city at will. In purely territorial terms, the battle had been utterly futile. Hundreds of thousands of men had died for a few square miles of devastated, shell-torn ground. The human cost was almost incomprehensible. French casualties at Verdun totaled approximately 377,000, including 162,000 dead or missing. German casualties were nearly as high, approximately 337,000, including 143,000 dead or missing. Combined, over 700,000 casualties. Over 300,000 dead. To put that in perspective, more men died at Verdun than the total number of American combat deaths in all of World War II. The casualties at Verdun exceeded the entire population of many major cities. And these numbers only account for the killed and wounded who were recorded. In the chaos of the battle, many men simply disappeared, buried by shell fire, vaporized by direct hits, lost in the mud and never found. The true death toll will never be known. So what did Verdun mean? What was the purpose of this immense sacrifice? Falkenhayn's strategy of attrition had failed. He had intended to bleed France white while preserving German strength. Instead, both armies had bled catastrophically. Germany had gained almost nothing and lost an entire generation of soldiers in the attempt. For France, Verdun became something else, a symbol of national endurance, of refusal to surrender, of collective suffering shared by an entire army and an entire nation. Ils n'y passeront pas, they shall not pass, became more than a military order. It became a statement of French identity, of determination to survive no matter the cost. But survival came at a terrible price. The French army was exhausted, traumatized, bled nearly to the point of collapse. In the spring of 1917, when Nivelle, promoted to overall command based on his success at Verdun, launched another offensive, it would fail catastrophically, triggering mutinies throughout the French army. The scars of Verdun ran that deep. Today, the battlefield of Verdun remains largely as it was left in 1916, a preserved zone of destruction. The land is so contaminated with unexploded ordnance, poisoned by chemicals, and disturbed by shells that it has never been fully reclaimed. The forest that has grown back covers ground still marked by endless shell craters. Signs warn visitors not to leave the marked paths. The Douaumont ossuary, a massive memorial built after the war, contains the bones of over 130,000 unidentified soldiers, French and German together, impossible to distinguish after death, who were gathered from the battlefield. Their remains fill the vaults beneath the memorial, visible through small windows, a testament to the anonymity of mass death in industrial warfare. Villages that existed before the battle, Beaumont, Haumont, Louvemont, and 6 others, were never rebuilt. They are classified as villages de truce, destroyed villages, maintained as memorials, their sites marked by small chapels, their pre-war mayors still officially recorded though they govern only ghosts. The Battle of Verdun proved what many had suspected but few wanted to admit, that modern industrial warfare had become a machine that consumed its participants without regard to strategy, tactics, or reason. It created casualties not to achieve objectives but simply because that was what it did. Attack. Verdun was not won or lost in the traditional sense. It was endured. Over 700,000 casualties on both sides for minimal territorial gain. An entire generation scarred by the sheer, unending brutality of the fighting. For the French, it became the ultimate symbol of national resistance and sacrifice. For the Germans, a grim strategic failure, proving the futility of an attrition strategy at such a cost. The scars of Verdun, both on the land and in the collective memory, remain to this day, a stark reminder of the true cost of industrial warfare. If you want to understand the darkest chapters and the most profound lessons from military history, make sure you subscribe to History of Conflicts. Hit that notification bell and join the discussion below. We want to hear from you. What do you believe was the most heroic, or perhaps the most tragic aspect of the French defense at Verdun? Thanks for watching.